see. Okay, and I just wanted to thank Mike for being here. Mike is the expert on Long Island coyotes and many different studies that he's doing, which I'm grateful that he'll share with us. So I am going to pass it over to Mike. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat and I can read them while Mike is talking if they're about something on the slide. Or if you
Right, come
prefer,
here right away.
you can save until the end and then you can we can always ask your question out loud or you can unmute yourselves, but for the time being I'll just ask everyone to mute themselves and then I'll pass it over to Mike. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Kara. So, a little correction there in Kara's introduction. The real expert on coyotes in this area is a guy by the name of Chris Nagy. He's with Mayanis River Gorge Preserve. I think it's a Nature Conservancy Preserve, actually. They're affiliated anyway with them. But he's the one that's been working with a group called Gotham Coyote for a long time. And he's in our Long Island Coyote Study Group. And he's very knowledgeable, and I've learned a lot from Chris. He's working on a manuscript right now of a diet study. We did a year-long diet study at 5 sites on Long Island. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then a few things about Quogue Wildlife Refuge. Beautiful spot. Just this year, so in 2025, a young guy by the name of Carson Campbell, whose dad used to be the county entomologist, Suffolk County entomologist. He's going for his Eagle Scout badge, which I think he got. But anyway, he wanted to do something about otters, so he designed a interpretive sign and installed that at the refuge and also set up a trail cam. And he not only recorded the first physical evidence of a river otter at the refuge, but he also recorded something even more incredible, which is we assume the long-tail weasel. It was hard to tell from the image on his trail cam, but nonetheless, a weasel species, one of 3 weasel images we have in the last couple of years. And one of those images was a roadkill. So actually one of 2 live weasels. So just want to acknowledge him, and it's a great finding for Wildlife Refuge. So let's start here with a couple questions that and comments, I guess, that I want to make sure that I hit at some point during this presentation. We're going to get into a really interesting dilemma as, what is a species? Because technically, we learned in even high school biology that species is basically defined as a group of animals that can only breed with themselves. And that's going to be an interesting dilemma when we're looking at the eastern coyote. And then there's native species versus invasive species. And basically an invasive species is a species that was helped into an area by man. It's not natural. It didn't naturally get there. And there's been a lot of misinformation about the coyote. It's a very controversial animal. It was never found on Long Island, so it's not like the river otter that was here years ago, got wiped out due to mostly the fur trade, but also habitat changes and but really mostly unregulated hunting and trapping. So that's made a comeback here naturally. But the eastern coyote or coyotes in general were never here on Long Island. They did get here on their own. It's a fascinating story. And there's a bunch of other species that got here on their own without the help of people. One of them is the Virginia possum, which is a southern species that made its way north and got here in around the 1890s. And in 1942, the great blackback gull started nesting on Cartwright Island, the south end of Gardiner's Island. And that's a northern coastal species that made its way down from Canada to Maine and then into Massachusetts and over to Long Island. Um, so there's examples of that. There's a lot of examples of that changes over time. Um, let's see, range expansion versus recolonization versus transplants. So that's another thing. So what I was just talking about is basically range expansion. And otters a good example of recolonization. And then transplants are obviously animals that were moved around. And a lot of bad examples of that all over the world. Um, and hard to undo once you set that up. But believe it or not, our common cottontail, we probably the only species of cottontail now on Long Island is the eastern cottontail, and that was brought here by people. So you could actually consider that it kind of fits the definition of an invasive. But it's not invasive in the sense of causing any real problems to other plants and animals. Um, and I should point out that this is a huge challenge faced for species that are expanding their range and recolonizing Long Island after being wiped out in the past. And that's because Long Island obviously is an island, but not only that, the closest uh, places on the island are to the mainland are highly urbanized, one of the most urbanized settings in the world. That's quite a challenge. And the coyote got established on the mainland in the Bronx. It was there for quite a while before we started finding individuals making their way over, and even longer, making their way over to Long Island, and even a longer amount of time before they successfully bred here. And then there's the issue of different types of predators. So kind of talking about the upper end of the food chain or the food pyramid. We have no terrestrial apex predators on Long Island. And we have a lot of two particular species of mesopredators, the raccoon and the fox, the red fox. And they go through a boom and bust cycle that's really, well, personally, I don't really like to see that. So there's nothing controlling them from the top down. And the raccoon gets canine to distemper, and I'll be doing field surveys some years, and there's dead raccoons all over the place. Not a mark on them. It's a disease. And then, and a lot of you are probably more familiar with the issue with the red fox. You see these really horrible looking creatures wandering around where they're losing a lot of their fur. So that's a mite, and it's called sarcoptic mange. It doesn't kill the red foxes, but it taxes their immune system, and they fall victim to other things that they would normally fend off, other diseases. And so they go through this boom bust cycle. A couple of years go by, you don't see any foxes, and then you see foxes everywhere a couple of years later. So at least my hope was that even though the coyote is a mesopredator, just like the raccoon and the red fox, that it might act a little bit like an apex predator. It's bigger than those two species, and it does, unlike those two species, it will hunt in packs, which are really family groups, small family groups. And not that they would necessarily prey on the red fox or the raccoon, but they would mark territories. So they're very territorial. And those other two species might want to avoid the coyotes' territory, which can be fairly large. And so they have less space to take up, and they're less likely to get that density-dependent disease. Um, and then I do have a slide about the last thing, injuries to humans, coyote versus domestic dog. There's a lot of this is a new animal in the Long Island area. Other communities have lived with this for decades and learned to coexist with them. There's some things you need to keep in mind when you've got coyote as a neighbor. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. So, onward. This was well, Kara asked me if I had seen any coyotes. And no, I've never seen a coyote on Long Island, other than what I get in my trail cam or people send me pictures. But when I was in graduate school at the University of British Columbia, my field research for my thesis was in Banff National Park. I was studying elk, but yeah, these guys were all over the place. This is a western coyote. It's in its winter pelage, so it looks really stocky and short-legged. It would look different in the summer. But they're not very big. They're 20 to 30 pound range. And as compared to the eastern coyote, which is quite a bit bigger. And I wanted to throw in some information about the wolf because the story of the eastern coyote involves the wolf quite a bit. So this is the historic range of the wolf. It's basically of the gray wolf. It basically covered all of pretty much all of the continental United States and Canada. And except for this large area in the southeast, which was the domain of the red wolf. I can't remember if that's a subspecies or a different species. I think it might be a different species. But you can see from the slanted lines versus the dotted lines that the current range, where they've lost more than half of their historic range. And that was mostly because we declared war on them, as we declared war on a lot of other things that ate livestock or ate fish. So we had bounties on seals. We had bounties on bobcat on Long Island, uh, actually into the 1800s. And wolves actually resided on Long Island, and they were wiped out pretty quick with bounties in the 1600s. So this is a pretty big animal. This is a small female, is a little bit bigger than a western coyote, but close in size. And up to 175 pounds. That's it's a big animal. Okay. So regarding wolves, in 1800s, wolves were still found in New York State. And they were eradicated by the late 1800s, early 1900s. And in the 1920s, a new canid showed up in northern New York. We thought it crossed over from Canada, or it crossed over the St. Lawrence River. It was smaller than a wolf, but bigger than a western coyote. And it was a new animal on the landscape. And the assumption was that it was a coyote that bred with a domestic dog, because there are just a few trickling over. And what they were doing really was they were exploiting a new vacant niche. Sorry, that was uh, left behind when we declared war on the wolf and wiped them out. So they exploited that and moved eastward. And in the 1970s, I was a student at St. Lawrence University, and my ecology professor, Doc Green, was studying this new animal. We're right across the St. Lawrence River from Canada. And they didn't have the sophisticated lab techniques to tease out the genetics back then. And the name that they used, the biologists called it a coy dog. They assumed it was mix of coyote and dog, which can happen. It's unusual, but it can happen.
Linda Novak.
And this shows the progression of the distribution of the coyote from pre-European. It was really in the plains and desert areas of the West. Was not found east of the Mississippi. And as we slowly exterminated the wolf, it moved not only eastward into the Great Lakes area, but it moved a little bit west and a lot north into the southern part of Canada. I mean, Alaska. And then its present distribution is pretty dramatic. It's more than a 50% range shift. Uh, and it's getting down into Central America now. So north, south, east, and west. And this is another slide about that shift. So you can see the historical range in dark yellow orange, and then a little bit lighter in the 1900s and today, palish. So in New York, the New York area, they basically went around the north side of the Great Lakes and then came down into New York from Quebec and southern Ontario. And of course, some of you probably know that one of the closest places to hear and possibly see wolves in the wild is Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario. It's a great canoeing spot. And let's see. Okay, so anyway, now that we have the genetic analysis, we basically have this issue where we have this animal that's got about 25% wolf genes, little bit of dog, domestic dog, about 10%, and about 2/3 Western coyote. So it's significantly bigger. It's like 50% bigger than the Western coyote. And it has some behavioral traits that are more like wolves than Western coyotes. So there's a debate that's ongoing. Do we call this just, Canis latrans, the coyote, or do we come up with a new name and make this a new species? So that's still ongoing. Okay, and here's the breakdown of the DNA. Forgot I made a little fancy thing of these in. It varies quite a bit. So one of the questions I had when I started studying this was, uh, is this done now, or is this still going to interbreed with domestic dog, wolf? And apparently not. Apparently this is not happening anymore. So this was a short-term incident or event when they were migrating into new territory, and there were very few wolves left. And so here's another question. What was the mating pair? Was it a male or a female coyote with a male or a female wolf? And it basically in the wild anyway, it's a female, so it's a small wolf, a female wolf with a male coyote. Because the big guys, they're gonna this is one of their prey species. This is one of the wolf's prey species. They'll take them out. So the coyote's got to be careful. Now, the other interesting thing about this is while they can breed with domestic dogs, female domestic dogs, my understanding is that male domestic dogs won't mess around with a coyote, with a female coyote. So the breeding there is a male coyote. Sorry, um, yeah, a male coyote with a female domestic dog. So domestic dogs have two estrus cycles, or they go into heat twice a year. It doesn't match up very well, but it can. It depends on when the pup was born, because the cycle ticks off 6 months after they're born. And so if they're born in January, their first estrus cycle is in June. And if they're born in, say, September, their first estrus cycle would be like in the middle of the winter, and that would match up with with the coyote. So coyotes and wolves, they have a very short estrus cycle that's in late winter, early spring, and it's in the 5 to 7 days, so 5 days to a week. They're receptive to mating, and that's it. So they pair up. They're the rut. We call it a rut. That when they start seeking mates and they spend a lot of time together, they'll travel together, and that starts in January, around in the Northeast with the coyotes. And if you have snow and it's easy to track, you can actually see the pairs traveling together, and then they'll meet as soon as she goes into estrus, which would be right at the tail end of winter, so probably March. Okay. All right, so this is a little timeline for when they reached the Long Island region, and the first one is the closest spot where they can easily get over here. Actually they're pretty good swimmers. They've got we know of the swim they did to Martha's Vineyard from the Elizabeth Islands. It's about 2.5 miles, so it's a pretty good swim. So they got into the Bronx, and this is Chris Nagy's work. He put all this together. Uh, there were 5 breeding pairs in the Bronx at one point. So the first sighting was in 1995, and then the first sighting on Long Island. And then I can't read my screen, unfortunately. I got to get this thing out of the way. Okay. It was 2004. So these are just sightings. They didn't settle any place in particular at this point. Oop. Okay. And then in 2009, we have our first resident in Queens, just north of JFK Airport, at an abandoned building. Lots of photographs on the rooftop hanging out, but just a single animal. And the first one showed up on Fisher's Island, and that's a 2-mile swim from the mainland with a bunch of little rocky islands they could rest on if they needed to. And then so when these are obviously yearlings that are dispersing from their natal dens, and they've been, the yearlings have been recorded traveling as far as 100 miles. So the whole length of Long Island is not out of question from, say, the Bronx. We have a lot of photos of this one out in Sagaponack area, 2013. And the first breeding was at LaGuardia Airport. There's an employee parking lot, and then there's a ball field and a wood lot adjacent to it. And they bred in a den there, and that was a problem. That's active 24/7, the employee parking lot, and people coming in for the night shift. They started seeing the pups at one point and tossing food to them, so they got habituated to hanging out in the parking lot. And the authorities felt it was a dangerous situation, so they hired a guy to take them out. Um, and Fisher's Island is an interesting situation. It's a pretty small landmass, 4 square miles. And I was over there to do an otter survey in 2012, and that's when I learned that they had at least one breeding pair on the island. So it's small enough that I think most of the pups that are born there would have to disperse and take to the water. Um, so, oh yeah, and the other thing about this that was really interesting that I learned while I was doing the survey there was Fisher's Island has really, really excellent grassland habitat that's been preserved and managed. Some of you probably know Polly Wiegand. She was involved with some work over there at Fisher's Island's grasslands. But they couldn't attract the grassland breeding birds because they had a long-term feral cat colony, and they were really decimating the ground nesting grassland birds. And there was a debate on the island for years, back and forth, the bird lovers and the cat lovers. So yeah, it was a feral colony, people feeding the cats and yada yada yada, and then they were in a stalemate. Coyote came along, and within 2 years, there were no feral cats, and that issue was gone. And the grassland birds have recovered. Now, I'll talk a little bit about our diet study on Long Island because our first successful breeding pair on Long Island that weren't taken out was in northern Nassau, and adjacent to the property within their territory, the Coyotes' territory, was a feral colony of cats that was being fed and supplemented with food. But we didn't find any feral cat remains in any of the scats we collected over a year. So that was kind of it. Every place can be a little bit different. That's a good thing to keep in mind. Yeah, so anyway, the first breeding on Long Island, there were 8 pups. That's a big litter. And this is another thing about coyotes that's interesting. The more you persecute them with poisons and trapping and hunting, the more pups they'll have. So they're almost impossible to get rid of. We've declared war on coyotes since the mid 1800s, along with the wolf. Well, once we wiped out the wolf, then we could really focus on the coyote. And some wildlife biologists have figured out that you could take out 75% of a population in one region and they'll come right back. You're not going to get rid of them, make a comeback. So it's one of the interesting things about this species. Um, can everyone hear me? Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay.
We can.
So it's probably easier to make a list of what coyotes won't eat than what they will eat. But they're omnivores. They have a very omnivorous diet, particularly in late summer and early fall, with a lot of fruits available and seeds, and they'll take advantage of that. Many of us were hopeful that they would address our deer population issue on Long Island. But we quickly learned from people like Chris and Adji, because Connecticut has this very similar problem where they're losing the forest understory plants. And that has a ripple effect through the forest ecosystem with ground nesting birds and other things that need that forest ground cover. They will go after fawns. It's like a 10-day period where the fawns can't get away from them. So we find that in diet studies. But there was a big study done up north by ESF, SUNY ESF, in the Syracuse area. And they collected scats as we did. They collected scats year round and they examined them and came up with a list of things they ate. Deer were in all the scats every month of the year, and a pretty significant portion of their diet. Um, so then the question was, are they preying on deer? Are they chasing down deer? Up north, the deer have a tough time in the winter, and there's some conditions with snow cover where the coyotes can run across the iced over snow and not break through, and whereas the deer, the hooves just break through. And they also get yard up and they get caught in the yards or chased out onto a lake where they don't have much grip on the ice. Possible. It's possible. Um, so they did a telemetry study the following year, and they had a good study size, and they followed them. The only live deer that they preyed on were the fawns in that little window of like 1 to 2 weeks in the early summer in June. Other than that, everything was scavenged. And when you think about it, it's a wild animal. Why would it want to waste energy running after a deer if there's carrion all over the place? And as an example of the carrion that's around in East Hampton town, um, we keep track of that to some degree. It's the deer that get hit by a car and end up on the road. So this doesn't include all the deer that die from motor vehicle collisions. A lot of them make it off the road and die in the woods somewhere. But the highway department keeps tabs on that, and it's generally in the 400 to 500 deer a year that are moved off the roads in East Hampton town. So yeah, it's a lot of roadkill, and and they're smart enough to take advantage of that easy food source. Um, then they have as an image down here in the lower left of a Canada goose. So there's a lot of places in the United States where geese are considered a nuisance. They hang out on golf courses and they really make a mess of the putting green. And for those of you who are golfers, so that's an issue. And they I don't think they're really controlling the population, but they can eat the eggs and go for the nests, and they will do that. Don't know really if they're making a dent and if the golf course uh, managers don't have to worry about geese. There's other things they do to keep the geese off the greens. Um, but rabbit is a big part of their diet. And what we found on Long Island is so we collected scats on a monthly basis from 2020 to 2022. We did include Fisher's Island, but it's a long ways to go. So we recruited some people who live there, and they really only collected one fall, so we didn't get a lot of good data for that. But we did from the other four sites on Long Island. And there was the typical, a lot of plant matter, so, fruits and seeds. And then the next dominant thing it was mammals. And raccoon, rabbit, and small mammals were significant. And the surprise to me was raccoon. Um, we have a lot of raccoon on Long Island, and that's not an easy animal to take down. And the other surprise was they didn't bother the feral cat colony. I wondered if they were smart enough to realize that the cat food, the canned cat food, was pretty easy to come by and was resupplied every day, and maybe they shouldn't mess with that. But and no domestic dog. But someone sent me this video, and this answered my question about how they would take down a raccoon. So remember, I said they have some behavioral characteristics that are more like a wolf than a coyote. Let's see if I can start this. Yeah. So they pair up, and one goes for the head, one goes for the tail, and they slowly subdue it. And that's a nice meal for coyote family. So this is probably this could be a male and a yearling, or one of the adults and a yearling, or it could be the male and the female. So they do have a strong bond that they maintain, and they're not necessary. They might shift around with that, but they generally stick with the same partner. Okay. So I mentioned their reproductive cycle. They go into the rut where they travel around as a pair, the male and the female. A lot of scent marking. And the male wants, this is a male, the male wants to, he's sniffing for the blood when the female starts the estrus cycle. And she will ovulate at some point and near the end of the estrus cycle. But the sperm, they'll mate several times, and the sperm can last a few days. So that's all it has to hang out for, and they'll get fertilized. Um, and then both the male and the female take care of the young. This is different with the river otter. Just wanted to throw that in because the river otter is raised solely by the female. Male, they're polygamous. The male will mate with several females, and he has nothing to do with the young. And the young stay with the female, in the case of river otters, for 10 to 12 months. It's a very long period of maternal care. So they'll have a den site, and you can see the one on the left is probably getting fed some solid food, and the others are still nursing. But they have a den site that the adults are very protective of, and a lot of issues with aggressive behavior with human coyote contacts is when they're around the den site. So they're really on the alert there. They will have several dens, and they will move the pups around. We're not sure exactly what that's about. With red fox, it's usually a lot of skin mites. The place gets pretty infected, and they'll move the fox pups to a different site. Not sure if that's the same situation with coyotes. But once the pups are fairly good size, they will choose another site to meet up with. It's called a rendezvous site. And this is when they're really into getting fed some solid food. So the adults will catch food when they're really young. They'll swallow the food, and then they'll maybe cough up the the prey material for the young to eat. And this is the coyote that was out in Sagaponack. And this apparently never found a mate and just moved around and disappeared, moved on somewhere else with no idea um, where this one ended up, or when they're dispersing like this, there's a high incidence of motor vehicle collisions. Long Island has such a dense road network, and they're moving at night, and they're moving into areas they're not familiar with, and it seems like that's a significant source of mortality among the dispersing young. Um, yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, there was basically whoops. Um, War declared on the coyote among state and federal agencies. And again, I can't read this because I have my sharing thing. Yeah, okay. They attempted to eradicate the coyote. So that's been going on for about 175 years now. Poisoning, shooting from helicopters, trapping, all sorts of things. So there's a quote, I mentioned this earlier, as many as 75% of all coyotes in a population can be killed annually without causing an overall decline in numbers. And there was a guy I met this guy over on Fisher's Island who worked for the Water Authority, and he was into trapping. And when the coyotes moved over, they were actually preying on the ringneck pheasants that the the summer residents on the east end of Fisher's Island would import and stock every year, and they were kind of upset with that. So they hired him to trap coyotes. So every coyote he trapped, he got like $200 or something like that. And he went to a talk like this and found out that he was onto a good thing because he was never going to get all of them. The more he trapped them, the more they were going to have bigger litters. So he had a good thing going. Totally illegal though, on Fisher's Island. So I want to talk a little bit about I get a lot of images of animals and for ID, and there's a couple tricks to distinguishing among the canids. So the one on the right here is one on Fisher's Island, and it does have the black tip tail, which is a key thing, and also the tail hanging downwards. Not all, but the majority of domestic dogs have a curled up tail. And you can see both of these. Both of these are coyote, but look at the difference in the legginess. That's a summer coat on the left and the winter coat on the right. Wide variety of colors and even black. Um, but here on the left, you can also see the black tip tail, and then there's a dark spot where the tail meets the rump, and that's a scent gland. And this is the red fox, and on the right is a typical red fox. Most people wouldn't confuse that. But some of the key things are the that's in the winter pelage. That's a shot I got at Sunken Meadow. You got black behind the ears and black on the lower legs, but really only in the forward part of the legs, the front of the legs. And in this angle, you really can't make out the white tip tail very clearly. And on the left is a vixen in summertime. This is in June. And a lot of gray. That's just a summer coat. There's a lot of gray. You can see the black behind her ears. You can see her white tip tail. You can see the dark spot for the scent gland, which is not helpful, by the way, for species ID. But even in the young, you can see the white tip tail and the black behind the ears, backside of the ears. That shot was taken in Bridgehampton. They were using an old woodchuck burrow for a den. So these are the ones that get kind of tricky, and I can understand how people would have a hard time with this. So the one on the left it's a cell phone photo that was sent to me. And it's moving away from you, and it's turned its head to look at the photographer. So you can't see the obvious black behind the ears and the front part of the legs. But you can see the white tip tail. So that's a fox. And they thought it was a coyote. And then on the right, the adult's in the background. And this is a summer photo, late spring, early summer. And these are two pups in the foreground. You can see the black tip tail on the one in the forward part of the screen. And you can also see there really is no indication of any black behind the ears, and obviously black in the lower legs. And then this was a really tricky one, pretty far away. And this was I had heard rumors. This is a golf at the bridge, and they said, "Oh, we've got got coyotes here. We definitely have coyotes. We see them all the time. See the pups and yada yada yada. And they finally got a photo and sent me. And this is definitely a red fox pup. Black in front on the lower legs. See a little bit of the black edging on the ears. And if you zoom in and play around, you can. It's very hard to see the white tip tail because it's sitting on the white sand, but it is there. And then let's see. Um, this on the upper left is that this animal has a lot of reddish coloration, and then a gray back. There's no black on the lower legs, and there's no black behind the ears, really. This is the gray fox, and I've never seen a live gray fox anywhere. I've only seen roadkills and trail cam images. But there's another distinguishing. These are pups. These are kits. They're not adults. And on the right is a screenshot from a video I took of a red fox in my neighborhood. You can really see the white tip tail here. And this is in early summer when the pups are weaned. And in my experience, is the two adults are working round the clock to feed them, and they don't wait for dark, and they don't bother when they don't bother hiding or being out of view. They take the shortest distance back to the den, even if it means walking along the side of the road. So I'm actually driving, and I took this video as I drive. This is 20 feet away from me, and I was couldn't figure out what he had in its mouth. They're known as great mousers, but in my experience, what they really go for is a mouse-like small mammal vole, the meadow vole. And it needed to rest at one point, so it stopped, dropped what was in its mouth, and it was four big fat meadow voles that it had caught, making its way back to the den. So, you can find more info about coyotes at our website, seatuck.org. And we're available to do presentations like this to community groups and libraries and whatnot. But one of the most important things that we can do as wildlife biologists at this point in time is just educating Long Islanders about this species. Fascinating animal, and it's other communities have lived for many decades with this animal, including urban areas like Chicago. And there are some issues, but there's ways to avoid conflicts, and one is to uh, not intentionally feed coyotes. That's probably the biggest takeaway. That just creates all sorts of problems. And you also need to make sure your garbage and your compost bin is inaccessible, which is pretty easy to do. I have hens, and a coyote could definitely get in my backyard and get at the hens, but I have an automatic door that opens at daybreak and closes at sunset, and they know enough to get in there, so they're safe from. And I have a lot of red fox in the neighborhood, so and raccoons, but that's enough to keep them safe. Um, and then there's something called hazing that if you have a coyote that's getting a little close, seems a little bit aggressive, you throw something at it, yell, wave your arms, and just be aware that in the uh, late spring and early summer, they're very sensitive about having people get close to their den or their rendezvous site. So keep that in mind. And Before I sign off and take questions, just a call out to it. We're wrapping up the Long Island Mammal Survey. It's been a 3-year project, and we have uh, this hasn't been done since the last survey was done 60 years ago. We have no gray fox images or sightings or evidence on Long Island. It appears to be extirpated. Um, that is not a real surprise. John Turner, who's in the audience, and I lobbied, that must have been about 10 years ago when Peter Scully was regional director for VEC, to get that off the allowable hunting and trapping list. But we were unsuccessful. We're going to give that another shot, though. And but the big surprise is we have no mink sightings, with the exception of Fisher's Island. On Long Island, we have no mink. And Paul Connor wrote in his publication, 1971, he's the guy that did the survey in the 60s, 3 years. He said, mink are not super common, but they're found in all the estuaries on the North Shore and the South Shore. They love the salt marshes. Um, and in addition to freshwater wetlands, they love those estuarine areas. Find a lot of food, very happy in those areas. Not a single sighting of mink. And we do have a couple sightings of the long-tailed weasel, but I think we have 3 live weasel sightings. One of them at Quogue Wildlife Refuge. So if we get them off the allowable trapping list for Long Island, they might be able to make a comeback.
Hey, we have minks on Long Island.
What's that?
Oh,
Okay, so that's it.
thank you, Mike. That was great information. I do see some questions that I'll read from the chat, and then if anyone has a question that they prefer to say out loud, you could always raise your hand. I think it might be in the reactions if you press that down at the bottom, or you can unmute yourself too. But one question from Jane at the beginning of the program was, are you connected with the Wild Dog organization?
Yes. So we have a Long Island Coyote Study Group, and there's Hofstra University, Russ Burke, Chris Nagy from Gotham Coyote, Seatuck, uh, the Jennifer Murray from New York State Parks is very involved with it. So there's a bunch of organizations, and Frank Vincenti is Wild Dog Foundation guy, and he's very involved in it.
And then another comment that Stephanie put in the chat was that she thought she saw a coyote that had been run over on Route 25A near Wading River a few weeks ago. Would that also be something that people could put in the sighting survey if they thought they saw a dead animal?
We because it's a scientific survey, we need actual data. We can't take I saw this or I saw that. It's got to be a photo, and
Mhm.
roadkills are acceptable. Um, yep.
Okay, great. And then I see John has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Kara. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hey, John.
I just want to make a comment about the gray fox. Um, I think you indicated nobody's reported any as part of the survey, and that may lead one to the thought that the animal's extirpated from the island, and that may be. But I did want to make note that I had it's got to be about almost a decade ago. I think I mentioned this to you, a prolonged view of a gray fox in a southeast quadrant of the dwarf pine plains, just south of where the Pine Barrens Commission offices are, and that circuitous trail, the nature trail they put in,
Right.
and I watched it for off and on for several minutes as it was going between the islands of Scrub Oak and Pitch Pine. It was really wonderful. And then I had a roadkill as well. And then I did find in the southwest quadrant or Pine Plains a gray fox skull, which I must confess I did not know was a gray fox skull. I thought it was a fox, but I thought it was red fox. And then I keyed it out, and it has that one little feature about that crest on its skull.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
anyway,
it's an easy one
yeah,
to key out. Yeah.
yeah. So I have a skull, and then the point in back in Yapank, and this is going back even further. There was definitive gray fox. Again, that's why I had one roadkill and an active den for a few years. So I actually suspect the gray fox is still hanging on. Um,
Okay,
not sure why
so
nobody has.
John, like I said,
Yeah,
this is a scientific survey,
yeah,
and we have no recent evidence
yeah. No,
of
I realize.
fox. Now, Luc Ormond has set up cameras in the Yampang site,
Yeah.
and he's got no images.
No, no, I know that.
The,
Yeah,
the last image we have of a live gray fox is Jennifer Higbee's uh, trail cam image. I think it's 2007. I'm not positive about that, but I have that on another slideshow about the
yeah,
Mammal Survey. And you know what happened with that? That was a family unit that just outside the B&L property um, in the Peconic River watershed. And when she went to take a trapper's a class to get licensed to trap gray foxes, she wanted to do a radio telemetry study of that family unit.
right.
And the guy teaching the trapper course found out, what she was up to and uh, trapped out the family.
Right.
So,
Yeah, no, I realize that. Um,
yeah, I was hopeful that it could still survive in some of those places you just mentioned in the Pine Barrens.
yeah,
But we have trail cameras set up at the north end of Quogue Wildlife Refuge, and it's really a stone's throw from where you had the sighting in the Dwarf Pine Barrens.
yeah, it's just across the airport. Yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
So,
Yeah, so maybe it is gone, but hope not. And I hope
well,
that we
this is
can
why I put
get a
this
better
up
thing.
because
Yeah,
we, we can still take evidence. We're not closing this down, but in 2026, we're writing the report. And
right.
even if we do have a sighting or two, I don't think it's, first of all, we have to get the trapping rigs changed, obviously.
Yep.
I don't know that it might be worth doing a suitability study about reintroducing more to get the genetic pool up. But I think for sure for the mink, I think we should press the state to look into doing a reintroduction program.
Hmm.
That's a yeah, they take to the water, but it's not like an otter. I don't think they're going to naturally recolonize Long Island.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
we have a ton of excellent habitat on Long Island for the mink.
Yeah, I've seen
So
one mink on Long Island all my life. Yeah.
yeah. So they were in Shoe Swamp. Rob Filani, who wrote Long Island: A Natural History, had many years ago had a sighting of a family in mink. He actually
Wow.
saw the young in Shoe Swamp. Um,
We had another question going off of the gray fox from Jane. Why is the gray fox decreasing while the red is not?
well, that's a great question. In the literature, the gray fox is actually more competitive, more aggressive than the red fox. But and also another thing about the gray fox, it doesn't get sarcoptic mange,
Hmm.
and it's a great tree climber. Um, but it could be that with the exception of areas in the Pine Barrens, that it's just the red fox is much more adaptable to suburban landscape than the gray fox. So it's really a habitat change issue. And that's why I said, it might be worth doing a suitability study. Is it really worth trying to bring them back on Long Island? Is there enough habitat? This is more of a brushy uh, forest species than the gray fox. I mean, than
Mhm.
the red fox. There were sightings. Connor mentioned that they were definitely out in the Montauk area, and we do have a roadkill from Montauk. Not maybe like 15, 20 years ago.
Very interesting.
Good question.
Yeah, that was a great question. I have a question. I was wondering if you had to make a prediction for like the next 20 or 30 years, what do you think the population of coyotes would look like on Long Island?
Ooh, so you want a number?
It
I
doesn't have
hate
to
the
be a
number
number.
questions. You know what? Every talk, someone comes. I thought I was going to get away with it tonight, but
No.
last night, how many otters are there on Long Island?
Doesn't have to be a
So,
number. I was more thinking like, do you envision that people will see them in their neighborhoods or it's interesting to me to think about like
yeah,
that we haven't seen sightings here in, a preserve area, but that we've heard of people seeing them in neighborhoods and stuff, which
yeah,
makes sense
yeah.
that they can have access to food. But I was just curious where you think they would be more likely to be seen.
There's okay. So they are in Central Park.
Mm,
They've been there for a while. It was a sole. I think they considered it a male that was hanging out in the brambles for a couple of years by himself, and then within the last 2 years, it paired up. So another coyote is hanging out with it. I don't know if they've had pups. I'll have to check with Chris on that. But I don't, just like the question of what do they eat, it's easier to list what they don't eat. It would be easier to list where they wouldn't be found on Long Island, and I can't really think of anything. I mean, we have evidence of them on Fire Island, and they're all over Cape Cod. So any you know dune beach areas, yeah, they're going to be all from New York City all the way out to Montauk Point.
right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question was, are they known to eat small dogs elsewhere? She has an apartment in the North Bronx near Van Cortlandt Park, and the residents go berserk at every coyote sighting that their small dogs will be eaten.
Yeah, I don't see why they wouldn't tangle with a small dog, but most people I know that have small dogs, they carry them around with them. So I don't think the coyote. I'm just kidding. And actually, that's true, but yeah. So you'd have to be you'd have to be careful.
Mhm.
There's dogs that are like a lot of dogs I see these days. You can put them in a pocketbook. They're not much bigger or even smaller than a cat.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and uh, yeah, so that gets down to the coexisting stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much, Mike. This was amazing presentation and information, and I will email it to everyone who signed up. So if you all want to share with another person, I think it would go a long way to helping everyone coexist with coyotes. And the more we know, I think the better we can help them. So
okay.
thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah, and a shout out to Brian Frank if he's still there. I saw his name. Brian, I'm hoping you're going to do a talk at the Long Island Natural History Conference. Right. Well, listen,
Right.
everyone, have a good night, and thanks for listening in.
All right. Good night.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mike.